In America, we have too much stuff. We buy things, we grow out of them, but we can't bring ourselves to throw them away. So we rent boxes. Metal boxes in giant concrete warehouses. They call it self-storage. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry built on the fact that we can't let go of the past. I rented my unit in North Philadelphia, right near the industrial tracks. It was a climate-controlled facility, which sounds fancy, but it really just means the air is always unnaturally cold and smells like ozone and industrial floor cleaner. The manager, a guy named Gary, who looked like he hadn't seen the sun since the 90s, gave me the keys to unit number 311. Top floor, he said, not looking up from his crossword puzzle. Last one on the left. Just don't stay past midnight. The motion sensor lights are glitchy. I didn't think much of it. I just needed a place for my late father's old furniture and a dozen boxes of books. I wanted them out of my sight, but not out of my life. Not yet. The elevator was one of those old industrial ones with the sliding metal gate. It groaned as it climbed to the third floor. When the doors opened, I was met with a hallway that seemed to stretch into infinity. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead with a rhythmic buzz. Pop. Buzz. The floor was polished concrete, marked with a single yellow line down the middle. To my left and right were identical corrugated metal doors, all painted a sickly shade of security orange. Each one was secured with a heavy padlocked disc. It was silent, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence you find in a graveyard, where you know something is there. It's just not moving. I pushed my cart full of boxes down the hallway. My sneakers squeaked on the concrete, the sound echoing off the metal walls. Squeak, squeak, squeak. I passed number 301, number 303, number 307, and then I stopped. Unit number 309, the one right before mine. Most units were locked tight. You could see the heavy master locks, the silver glint of security. But number 309 was different. The latch was slid back. There was no lock. The door was cracked open. Just a sliver. Maybe an inch. Inside, it was pitch black. I stood there for a moment, my heart doing a strange little stutter in my chest. In a place like this, everyone locks their doors. You don't pay $80 a month to leave your stuff exposed. I figured maybe someone was inside, reorganizing. "Hello?" I called out. My voice traveled down the long, empty corridor and came back to me, sounding smaller and thinner. No answer. I leaned in just a bit. I shouldn't have. But curiosity is a disease. Through the 1-inch gap, I could smell something. It wasn't the ozone or the cleaner. It was the smell of old, wet wool. And something sweet, like rotting peaches. And then, from the darkness of number 309, I heard a sound. Screech. The sound of a fingernail dragging slowly across the inside of the metal door. I lunged for my own unit, number 311. My hands were shaking so hard, I dropped my keys twice. The metal clang of them hitting the floor sounded like a gunshot in the hallway. I finally got my lock open, shoved my cart inside, and slammed my door shut. I sat there in the dark of my own unit, surrounded by my father's old chairs, breathing hard. I felt like a child hiding under the covers. "It's just a draft," I whispered to myself. "Old buildings shift, metal expands. It's just physics." I pulled out my phone. I have a small, battery-operated security camera, one of those cheap ones you can monitor from an app. I'd bought it to keep an eye on my dad's antiques. I set it up on top of a tall bookshelf, pointing it toward the small gap at the bottom of my door. I left the facility quickly. I didn't look at number 309 as I ran past. I didn't look at the elevator. I just wanted to be outside, in the humid Philly air, under the streetlights. That night at 3:14 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Notification, motion detected in unit number 311. My stomach did a slow roll. I opened the app. The footage was grainy, night vision green. At first, there was nothing, just the silhouettes of my furniture. But then I saw it. Underneath my door, in the narrow gap between the metal and the concrete floor, something was moving. It was a piece of paper. Someone was sliding a folded note into my unit from the outside. Then the movement stopped. But the camera didn't stop recording. A few seconds later, something else appeared in the gap. It was a finger. A long, gray, bloodless finger with a jagged nail. It didn't try to open the door. It just rested there, pressed against the concrete, as if it was feeling the vibrations of the room. Then a voice came through the tiny speaker of the camera. A whisper that sounded like dry leaves blowing over a grave. "You forgot to lock your neighbor's door." The screen went to static. I went back the next morning. I had to. I told myself I'd bring a manager. I'd report the break-in. But when I arrived, Gary wasn't at the desk. The office was locked. The elevator worked, but it felt slower, heavier. I walked to number 311. The hallway felt different. The yellow line on the floor looked wet. I opened my door. The note was there. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It wasn't a note. It was a photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from behind. I was standing at the elevator on the first floor, waiting to come up. But the photo wasn't taken by a security camera. The angle was low, like someone was crouched on the floor, right behind my heels. I looked at the back of the photo. Written in dark, oily ink were the words, "I like your radiant heat. It's cold in number 309. I turned my head slowly toward the wall I shared with the neighboring unit. Through the thin metal partition, I heard a wet, thumping sound. Thump, thump, thump. Like a heavy tail beating against the floor. And then the light in my unit flickered and died. The darkness in unit number 311 wasn't just an absence of light. It felt heavy, like a wet wool blanket thrown over my head. I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling in the void. The screen lit up, casting a cold blue glare on the stacks of my father's old furniture. In that flickering light, the shadows of the chairs looked like skeletal figures crouching in the corners. Thump, thump, thump. The sound from the other side of the metal wall was getting faster. It wasn't just a tale anymore. It sounded like something heavy and wet was being dragged upward along the corrugated steel. I turned my flashlight toward the wall I shared with unit number 309. The metal was bulging. The steel sheets were bowing inward toward me, the rivets groaning under a pressure they weren't designed to hold. Whatever was in number 309 wasn't just standing there. It was pressing its entire weight against the partition, trying to get through. "Gary!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Gary, help!" No response, just the hum of the climate control and the rhythmic thump of the wall. I lunged for my door, desperate to get back to the hallway. I grabbed the latch and pulled. It didn't budge. I pulled harder, my boots slipping on the polished concrete. The door was stuck. Not locked, stuck, like someone was holding it from the outside. I looked down at the gap at the bottom of the door. Through the thin sliver of light from the hallway, I saw a pair of shoes. Gary's shoes. I recognized the worn-out brown loafers he'd been wearing at the front desk. "Gary, open the door. Something is in number 309. Gary didn't move. He didn't speak. Then I saw his feet begin to lift off the ground. Slowly, inch by inch. His loafers dangled in the air, then his socks, then his bare, pale ankles. He wasn't jumping, he was being pulled upward. The last thing I saw before the hallway light flickered out was Gary's fingers gripping the top of my door frame, his nails snapping off as he was dragged into the ceiling tiles. The thumping against the wall stopped. For a second, there was a silence so absolute I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. Then came the smell. It was no longer just rotting peaches. It was the smell of a damp basement that hadn't been opened in 100 years. A smell of old earth and copper. I pointed my phone's light at the ceiling. The drop ceiling tiles were moving. One by one, they were being pushed aside. A pale, hairless head peered down from the darkness of the vent space. It had no eyes, just two smooth patches of skin where the sockets should have been. But its mouth was wide, filled with rows of small, needle-like teeth that looked like they were made of yellowed bone. "I told you," it whispered, the voice coming not from the creature, but from the speaker of my own security camera on the shelf. "It's cold in number 309. We need your radiant heat." The creature didn't jump. It flowed down the wall like liquid, its limbs too long, its joints snapping with the sound of dry kindling. I backed away, tripping over a stack of boxes. I fell onto my father's old armchair. The creature was on the floor now, crouched in the middle of the room. It was folding itself. It didn't have a spine. It moved like a contortionist, tucking its long legs behind its head, shrinking its torso until it was no larger than a suitcase. It was trying to fit into one of my father's old wooden trunks. "Why?" I managed to gasp, my lungs burning. "Because," the camera speaker crackled, "we can't leave the facility unless someone carries us out. You're moving today, aren't you?" I looked at the trunk. The lid was open. The creature slid inside, its pale skin glistening in my flashlight beam. "Close the lid," it whispered, "or I'll have to use your skin as a blanket. It's so cold." I looked at the door. It was clear now. No one was holding it. I had two choices. I could run and leave everything behind. My father's memories, my heritage, my life. Or I could take the trunk. I ran. I didn't look back. I burst through the emergency exit, the alarm blaring like a funeral bell. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I've been in my new apartment for 3 days now. I didn't bring any of the furniture. I left the storage unit open, the lease unpaid. But this morning, when I woke up, I heard a sound from the hallway. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The sound of an industrial cart on a concrete floor. I walked to my front door and looked through the peephole. There, in the middle of my carpeted hallway, stood my father's old wooden trunk. It was wet, covered in gray dust and smelling of rotting peaches. There was a note taped to the top. "You forgot the keys. We're home now." I looked down at the gap under my apartment door. A long, gray, bloodless finger was slowly sliding across the wood, tasting the air of my living room. And then the lights in my kitchen flickered and died. If you have a storage unit, if you haven't visited it in a few months, go today, check the lock, make sure the latch hasn't been slid back. Because they don't want your stuff. They just want a ride home. And once you let them in, there are no curtains thick enough to hide you.